Hi everyone. Welcome to Elevating Digital Roles, the first in a series. Today's session is all focused around defining digital roles and bringing clarity to your team. So you have two speakers today. So my name's Ashley. I'm a BCS Key Account Manager. I've been working with BCS for over 5 years. I work with lots of different organisations to help understand skills and capability. I'd like to introduce my colleague, Andrew Barnett, who is our BCS technical consultant. I'll let him introduce himself.
Hello, everybody. Thanks very much for the opportunity to share some of the work we do with organisations. So I appreciate you making the time today, and I'm very much looking forward to it. Thank you.
Wonderful. Just some quick housekeeping before we dive into the main part of this. I think it's going to force you to, but please keep your microphone and cameras switched off. There will be a Q&A session at the end, which we should have about 5 minutes for. Please use the Q&A section for that. And without further ado, I will continue. So I'm one of the key account managers at BCS, and I wanted to give you a little overview of who we are before we dive into our subject matter and what this session is focused on. So BCS are the professional body for IT. We have a Royal Charter. We are a membership organisation, and I think some of the things we talk about around building roles and understanding skill and capability, we are differentiated from a lot of those large consultancies because the reason we do this is all around making IT good for society. And the part of using some frameworks and skills capability mapping is all around understanding and giving mobility to those within the IT industry. Just sort of a little background who we are. So today's session, we're focusing on the challenge of around vague job descriptions and undefined career paths that can lead to confusion and mismatched skills. And hopefully what we're going to cover today is how to clearly define roles and responsibilities to ensure teams are structured for success. Now, in our experience, everything around these two questions around the challenge and what we're going to cover are underpinned by frameworks. So, Andrew, what do you think of the importance of IT skills frameworks from your experience of working with clients?
I think they are useful in a number of ways. From our perspective, I'll take SFIA as an example, but as we'll see later on, we do work with other frameworks that government entities use, DDaT, etc. But the SFIA one gives a number of advantages. Number one, it allows an organisation to provide some consistency in the way roles are created. Secondly, it enables the organisations to share industry good practices with their teams. And there's a third around the explanation and helping with some of the things that organisations really struggle with around internal movement structure. But it's around that, I suppose consistency is one thing, and maintenance as well. These frameworks are maintained by ourselves and the SFIA Foundation, so it helps you begin to keep a vigil of the ever-changing digital IT landscape. So there's a few there.
Excellent. Yeah, I just want to take sort of a higher look at that and understand early on what a career framework is. So hopefully the organisations you work with do use a framework, and I think part of what we should reflect on today is what frameworks you're currently using. I think from my experience of working with different clients, there is the benefit, as I think Andrew mentioned, for an organisational level, and some of the reason organisations work with us and look to do some of these pieces is having that commonality of language for describing skills and competencies within roles. Because what it does is it allows a consistency across all skill levels and a movement towards a skill-based organisation, and really building the idea of a job role being skill as a currency. So, for example, I work with an organisation that have had a merger recently. So they have two different organisations describing roles with two different languages, which is making moving of individuals between those two separate parts of the organisations challenging because the roles are described in completely different languages. And if you have that consistent career framework to describe those roles, it allows for I think a lot more mobility within organizations. And then from the individual point of view, there is a clear expectations for roles. So you know that the role you're working in there's clear expectations. It is benchmarked against an industry standard. and it has that, again, navigable and transparent career progression paths, both for employees and managers. To take that to IT framework specifically, and we're going to come on to SFIA in a second. But Andrew, what do you think is sort of strategically the critical importance of using an IT framework specifically?
Well, again, I think I touched on them already, and not to labour the point. But for what I will say is, if you do consider using, I would, as sort of research after today's session, is to look at the various frameworks that are out there. But don't think that it's those frameworks all the highway. You need to be incorporating things that make your organizations unique. So I can only reiterate my point before around structure, and you've touched on it again, Ashley, around just being mindful and utilizing those industry perspectives. You don't have to use them in lock stock. You can take elements that work best for you. But I'll reiterate the point around consistency. And also, just finally, another one that's jumped to mind is when you're positioning all of this with your teams, and a lot of these slides we're using today are from live projects that are ongoing. You've got things are done. You can genuinely say to people things are done in a fair and consistent way, and so they become a really useful way to maybe pull teams together and explain things in a bit more detail. Bearing in mind the frameworks are written by those subject matter experts out there who possess these skills. So that there's some useful kind of sound bites there that hopefully will answer that question, Ashley.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think from my experience as an account manager, lots of the reasons organizations come to talk to us about using frameworks before they even sort of decide on a framework to use is there is often responses to staff surveys and some of the technology employees that don't feel they're being invested in and don't feel there is that clear. I think that they're the same themes of the fairness and the consistency of language from that individual point of view, not understanding what that career pathway looks like. Now, I want to move on to talk about a specific framework and then maybe a more detailed version of that framework that sort of BCS are very much au fait with, and that is SFIA. So, have I gone to the next slide? Yes, it's SFIA. So I know we're terrible for acronyms in this industry. So it's Skills Framework for the Information Age, and I wanted to, and if you could give us a little background on. So this slide sort of talks about what SFIA is and how it's used, but your experience of using SFIA and where it began, if you could.
Right. Okay. In reverse order then. So it began and again, pointing to something that me and Ashley discussed the other day when we were thinking about this presentation, is that it's really important to have or be clear as to our position or in all of this as a professional body. We're here for the professional. So with that in mind, the framework was first penned back in the late 90s, something called the industry structure model. Long story short, it was the SFIA Foundation was formed, which we still sit on the board of. So it's their role to go out to industry and again keep a vigil over this ever-changing landscape that is IT and digital, and we happen to be on our 9th iteration of the framework. So there's some key points there, all of which are used to try and gain traction and to socialize. That's why this slide was put together. And again, I think everybody, if you're considering doing, if you've got some of the challenges that we've actually spoken about already, then do think about doing some more research into the frameworks that are out there, because before you choose to do anything, it's really important to know that they are going to be recognized. They have some substance and credence to them. And the reason, and when we look at it in a moment, I think we're going to have a quick deep dive into a purpose-built environment and probably build a role very quickly. But we can also say to people, the point of the framework is it's sharing good practices as viewed by those SMEs, and there are functions and peer review processes that are in play. But also this slide clearly illustrates to people that it is about progression. So that's why as a professional body, we support the SFIA Foundation and still do. And people can see that if they start a role in IT or digital, they can clearly see how their skill that's critical to their role is evolving and what they need to be considering as they move forward and also around other roles. So the slide for me talks about how it's applied, its robustness, but also how individuals can use it in the context of organization changes and workforce planning initiatives. So that's what I would say to that slide, Ashley. It's about sharing good practices and progression. That's what I would say.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think SFIA provides sort of a really good skeletal structure of an IT skills framework, and you see the
Yeah.
numbers on the right hand side. It's the language that describes each skill at each level, starting with follow, someone who can sort of follow basic instructions to enable a level 4, all the way up to setting strategy, inspire and mobilize. So, and then lots of what BCS offer and some other organizations are benchmarked to the specific broader levels. And I think it's that broadness that I think some organizations like, but I think it provides a challenge. So that's where having access to SFIA Plus is very useful. So this slide is going to sort of disseminate, and this will become a lot clearer afterwards when Andrew goes through our specific environment, the differences between SFIA and SFIA Plus. So if you are aware of SFIA, obviously it exists across these 7 levels: measuring autonomy, influence, complexity, business skill, and knowledge, with a description of what someone is doing within that specific skill, which again kind of comes to that conversation around skills as a competency. So it's underpinned by SFIA. So SFIA goes through several iterations. We're on issue 9 at the moment, which is informed by industry, describing what someone does at that level. But what it does is it provides a lot more of a granular detail, which is very useful when creating job descriptions or role profiles. So the example on the screen here, and Andrew's going to go into it a little bit more depth after this, is the skill of solution architecture. So as you can see, the sort of main title of what a solution architect is, the very, very broadest. This goes into a little bit more detail with this statement. So far, what you're seeing exists within the SFIA framework. Now, this is a statement that describes what a solution architect does at level 5 using the language of SFIA around autonomy, influence, complexity, business skill, and knowledge. However, and I think the issue comes, and we'll definitely explore that future in the series, is you cannot really benchmark yourself against a singular broad statement. So SFIA Plus takes that broad statement and it breaks it down into individual components like work activities, and those work activities have different components like what someone will be doing as part of that. There's different knowledge and skills which come with knowledge and skills depths, as well as different types of knowledge and skills, training activities, qualifications. So you can see quite quickly, and why some organizations choose to work with us, is it takes something that can be easily misinterpreted to something that's quite binary and quite descriptive. I don't know what your experience, Andrew, is of using these components. Obviously, we'll come into that when we take you through the environment.
Yeah, well, I think anyone on the call who's been involved in these sorts of programs, or maybe struggling to recruit or flag roles internally, or understand capability in any great detail, the components will kind of make sense. So for instance, an example of working with organizations who have career pathways, bringing their BAs through to solutions architects, so there's a commonality of skills in both those sort of role profiles, I can put it that way. The granularity also helps not only effectively explain the role in more detail, but also help people move slowly or step towards that role. So I can't suddenly become a solutions architect or a BA. It's very useful to be able to break that journey down into its steps. So you've got some work activities there as well. So the option to hang additional things off the SFIA skill has a number of advantages, chiefly helping to explain the doing of particular roles with recruitment, self-development, or mobility. It goes on and on, but also hanging or changing some of those statements for the organization's own statements as well, maybe particular types of working practices as an example. So it helps with the actual implementing or adoption, or whatever word you choose to use. Let's say you chose to use SFIA. It helps with the embedding, and more importantly, individuals can actually use it. It just makes the whole use of the framework a lot more straightforward for people, in my opinion.
Thanks. Yeah, I obviously absolutely agree with that. So I wanted to move on to, so as to access the SFIA Plus partner framework, there's multiple ways of doing it. One of which is being a BCS member, which some of you on the call may be. So you'll have access to the granular version of SFIA Plus. But part of the reason we're doing this is we have an offering and an environment that Andrew's going to show you just in very, very shortly, called Role Model Plus, which allows us to create and build those roles using those individual components and then allowing a benchmarking process, which will explain both from a BCS point of view and a non-BCS point of view in the next part of our series. So this infographic just talks about how that building of a role profile using those granulation of skills encourages that sort of skills as a currency and that mobility of individuals through succession planning and development and understanding skill and capability. Now, this is obviously a very quick overview of what we're looking at. So in the next 10 minutes, I'm just going to hand over now to Andrew, who's going to talk you through how we at BCS use SFIA Plus and other frameworks, and I think that's really important to understand, to build roles for future skills planning. So I'm just going to hand over to you, Andrew.
Thanks, Ashley. And that previous slide you showed there, I think, shows the challenge that myself and Ashley have in these sessions is, again, anyone will appreciate the complexities of these things. If you're dealing with people who are in, busy organizations, it can be quite challenging. But often the catalyst to a lot of this, more often than not, is the either adoption of a role. Let's say you work within the government space, or you feel you need to have some consistency or just update your role profiles. But it's a worthy thing to start with. What I will say on that, and thinking about our experience over the years, decades in some cases, is make that a collaborative exercise. So we can support, we can provide guidance, either a lot or a little. But where we're most successful is when organizations have completely sold themselves on this ability to utilize frameworks, plural. And as they change, they can quite confidently pen new roles, and we can help them with the updating of those roles when the frameworks iterate, by example. But I'm in an environment now. It is useful to have a purpose-built environment. So if you can, Excel's very flexible, I understand, but having an environment that helps just with accessibility of the work that you're creating as it iterates, as it evolves. And what you also want to do is, when we do create a role profile, we want to have it satisfy a range of things within an organization: understanding capability, staff mobility, career pathways, tightening up your L&D spend, workforce planning. All can be achieved if the role's created correctly, in collaboration, and people sort of buy into the process. And we're not really talking about much of that today, but yeah, so there's all those things to take into account. But the mechanics of building a role, and to reiterate the advantages of a framework, a lot of the stuff is out of the box. The SFIA framework is the voice of industry. It's not perfect, nothing is, but it's a significant step forward if you want to use SFIA or frameworks. It's one to be considered. It's the most widely used, I would argue. But as I said, we'll go in and we'll build a role really quickly and just reiterate some of the key points about it. So environments are useful. Ours are built in partnership with our clients. So I'm on board with that today. But there's lots of things you can do. So let's quickly, and those involved in this will probably appreciate some of the buttons. Not all, don't worry, I won't push all of them. But we have this environment where we can just do full version controlling. We can have, there's a series of global template roles. We chose not to do that, but there are government roles that you can just activate, NHS roles that you can just activate. There's a startup of 10. But what we've done is, in true Blue Peter fashion, showing my age, I'm going to quickly, here we go. I've built a wireframe of a role. So I'm going to add a role, family or grading if you wish, but let's open the role and we'll talk about its structure. So if you are choosing to use a framework, number one, I would research that after the call today and just have a look at what's out there. And I'm happy to, I think my email's on the end of this email, so I'm happy to share my experience of using them, how you would go about designing roles, etc. But go straight to it. We'll skip the topping and tailing of the role. But this, to reiterate a point that me and Ashley, I think, both made, were don't forego any of the uniqueness of your organization. If there are a set of specific work activities, technical acumen, behaviors, whatever that might be, that helps you differentiate as an organization or department, they can be woven in to this process. So you shouldn't forget those. We can weave those in, and we can account for them and benchmark against them and provide data against them as well. So just bear that in mind. But we'll bypass the government framework for a moment. We'll just jump straight to SFIA. Maybe, and I'm not giving people homework, but when you're researching frameworks, then do think also and then just have an appreciation of the levels. I mean, we both touched on them earlier, and just think to yourself, how this can possibly land or be utilized in your organization. As again, it's a framework that supports mobility, movement, progression, development of various skills. When you look at the framework, just for information, you're looking at a list of skills, not role profiles. And if you choose to use SFIA or SFIA Plus, there's a slight difference in approach, but you're going to basically be selecting the appropriate number of skills at the right level for the seniority, the level of role you're building. And that's basically what you're doing. But I can talk about that process in more detail later on. But what I'm doing here is I'm created, or I'm building a junior associate business architect role. And you might be, and when you build this, your BAs in this environment, they will automatically be matched. That's another advantage of using frameworks, because if I then independently built a BA role, I'm baking in commonalities between the two, and that is basically the basis of career planning, mobility, etc., which we'll talk about in future sessions. But if you are, and those who've probably done this already, but I've determined that I'm building an associate role, so I'm not picking skills from levels 5, 6, and 7, which represent more senior, evolved, developed skills. I'm going to be picking solutions architect. So just to repeat the point that Ashley made here, within this environment, you've got access to the SFIA skill descriptor. It's describing what solutions architect skill is. That's one of a number of skills that I'm going to add in. Similarly, the skill at a level as well, and you could leave it there. You could build a very high level SFIA role profile. However, if you wanted to achieve some of the other things we've touched on, recruitment, mobility, providing a more nuanced picture of your capability or capability gaps, as cited by many of our clients, which we can discuss maybe on future calls. And if you felt it was useful, you can add in some of the out-of-the-box work activities, also informed by those in the industry. This is not mine and Ashley's opinion of the work activities, God heaven forbid. It's those of the industry. And again, that's a useful bit of information to impart to people, to organizations who are thinking of adopting this. Again, they're there to use. Ashley mentioned other components, those things like behaviors. Again, they are not unique to this skill. If by selecting this behavior here, for instance, I know I'm going to be selecting it for other roles. If I benchmark it in the affirmative to that component, I've left a trace of my capability. Again, talking about the career path mobility piece, and qualifications as well. So what you've got there is a really rounded view of a particular skill, which we know is going to be central to the role we're creating. And I'm going to flag it as such. So again, that is exactly the same as if you were building it using SFIA. So I'm just flagging to all and sundry that is a primary skill for the role of associate business architect. But that's one of a number. And just really quickly, I would want to supplement that skill with another one. Again, I'm confirming, or I believe that business situation analysis is a critical component to the skill. Well, again, I'm shortcutting the peer review, the toing and fro, and the involvement with your SMEs into this process. I'm just out of the box selecting some random ones. So I'm going to say that's core as well. And I quite like the particular some work activities that, again, I'm thinking of the people moving into that role, and I want to be able to be a little bit more prescriptive in how I'm constructing it. Okay, and I could go on. So I've added 2. Typically, you'd be aiming at about 3 to 6 skills, sometimes more, but it depends. And again, we would course correct and adjust on the ground. In addition to that, you may have noticed that I can, so I've got a quick summary here of skills I've selected already, and I can do all sorts of things. I can edit and add to them. I can also add in various other bits of information. I can bring in my own skills and competencies, which is lovely. So, but what I will do quickly, if I don't want to publish that just yet, but if I go back to frameworks, I'll just leave it on this, because this is really important. And one thing that we get all bogged down in the technical exercise of building role profiles. I'm not going to fall down that rabbit hole today, but what I will say is absolutely critical and provides, or it bakes in or embeds things that are going to come up and are going to be critical to the success of any adoption of a framework, is the ability to add in, when you create the roles, think about, and we're not unique here, but all organizations who are a bit more advanced will already have mapped learning journeys for each role or role family, because your teams will benchmark. They'll want to do it, but then they'll say, well, what next? So it's really useful as you're crafting these roles to bring in L&D, bring in HR, bring in your subject matter experts and say, what learning do we have in our midst, or in a third-party system, or within the BCS software, or wherever it might be. I want to add that into the role. So when people are benchmarking, they can see that there is something that they can draw from to plug some of those gaps that this process will identify. So it's all about getting ahead of that particular challenge. That's something that we've learned over the years. So, and again, just finally, this is a role profile, and I always describe it in terms of lists of ingredients. But if you're in government, you would start with your government role, and you would add a SFIA complementary skill to it. But again, I'll reiterate another point is, those things that are unique to your organizations, they can also be woven and should be woven into this equation as well, thus satisfying as many people as you can in this process. So I'll pause there, Ashley, unless I've missed something that we've gone through, but I think I'll park it there, if that's okay.
No, that's great, and we are fastly running out of time, so I'm just going to pop back to the presentation and just finish this off 1 second. So in terms of next steps, I can see there's a question in the chat, so we'll come to that shortly. But this is the part of a series, and we've only been able to really sort of briefly touch the surface on this. The next session, which you'll find as part of the series in Eventbrite, is all around the benchmarking and upskilling. So we'll probably continue where we left off with some more of that role profile building, but we very much focused around, if you are building a role out of a framework, what does the benchmarking process look like, and what can you derive from that? We'll go to questions now, but I appreciate, we are running out of time pretty quickly. So if you are interested and want to learn a little bit more about what we spoke about today, and if you can't make some of the subsequent ones, first of all, please sign on to the next events, because I think they're really going to sort of continue with the conversation we've had today. But myself and Andrew would be happy to talk to you in more detail around how BCS work with organisations specifically, and just generally provide a sounding board and advice for next steps of what you're looking to achieve. So I can see there was one question in the chat which we just about have time to answer, and I think I'm going to put this to you, Andrew. So Michael Warman has asked, how would you define, and this is quite a broad question, how would you define digital roles, capability, capacity, knowledge, and skills?
Thank you. So I touched on it earlier, and I've worked for a number of years now with local central government. Previously, they were using SFIA, pivoted to using DDaT, and now GDaT. So there's this. It's kind of the devil's in the detail. I would simply highlight that, regardless of whether you think that they're better described using the government digital framework or SFIA, I firmly sit on the fence of how best to do that, because I'm course correcting and adapting to the organisation and the environment on the ground. So however it's best described, whether it's one of those two frameworks or another, we would just weave them in. I I think SFIA, from the government clients that we work with, as an example, they say SFIA is useful to describe the DDaT skills in more detail, help with the applying of those skills. But it is a tricky one to answer. But I would look at how they've already been defined, both in SFIA and the DDaT or GDaT taxonomies or frameworks as well. I know it's not answering the question, but that's a bit of a hot potato, that one. It depends, but I would just have a more detailed conversation about the environment that gentlemen's operating in, the roles, the situation on the ground, and then make an assessment. But there's been lots of effort and endeavours to try and describe them in various taxonomies. So I would begin to investigate those. Sorry, I've dodged the question, but
I think just to add to that, Michael, it's it's not an easy question to answer, but we'd be happy to take it offline and provide some more detail and have a more in-depth discussion around that if that's something you wanted to explore. I can see a question's being typed out. Now I know we've run over, so please don't feel under any pressure to stay on the call any longer if you're not able to. But if there are any other questions, we'll take those now. It's just a thanks, so no problem. But thank you very much for attending. The next one will be this time next week. If you have any questions or want to have any conversations, please reach out to me or Andrew. But otherwise, thank you for attending. We're only 2 minutes over, so that's a win. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you, everybody. Appreciate your time today.
Thank you.